Buddy, would you stand and would you sing with us this morning?
Darkness cups with you at this time. We're just going to take a minute just to remember Christ in communion. And we recently, of course, got back from Israel, which was a fantastic trip. And one of the things that you see a lot over there is a lot of places that are built to recognize things that we see in Scripture. And last time I got to go, we visited this little church in Tabgha, which is right on the Sea of Galilee, and it's this little chapel that was built to commemorate Jesus feeding the 5,000. We didn't get to go this last time, but it's one of those places that kind of sticks in my mind just because of the beauty of the building and the beauty of the mosaics that they built, and they have a mosaic that you can see on the screen that's built on the floor of this little chapel, and it's the fish and the loaves, and they say this is the spot. And maybe it's the spot. Probably not. And they'll leave a little exposed space of some rock, that has been built in the middle of this, where it's built and said, this is where Jesus did this. Maybe not. But let me tell you what it is. It's probably within a stone's throw. And again, what are they trying to do? They're trying to get you to imagine, to get you to think, to get you to look at this area, to look at this spot, and to remember. That's what we're doing. When we take the cup, when we take the bread, we do it to remember. We do it as a point in our week to say that this, what Christ did for me when his body was broken, when his blood was shed, was for me. We do it to remember that he sacrificed everything to give us everything. And so as we do it in a manner worthy of our Savior by thinking about Jesus Christ on a cross. We think about spikes being driven through his arms and his feet. We think about the physical pain and torture and the spiritual pain and torture that he went through for you and for me so that we could live in relationship with the Father, restored fully in Jesus Christ. So let's remember that this morning as we take these emblems together. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for another day to be together. And not together for just any reason, but together as members of the church, as people who love you, as people who serve you, united under the banner and the cornerstone of Jesus Christ. And so we thank you this morning for a time to worship your name, for a time to remember the sacrifice of your Son, Jesus. It's his name we pray. Amen.
You are made.
seat.
Well, good morning. The love of Jesus Christ and the good news of Jesus Christ with people outside of the church. And so we want to stand up for the lost. We want to reach out to the lost. We want to stand up for those who are abused and forgotten, for the poor and the weak. And so we talked about last week that we've got several opportunities coming up where we don't just want to learn about this, but we want to live it out, right? And so this morning we've got an opportunity to do that, and we don't just want this to be a one and done type of a thing, but we want this to be something that's ingrained in us, that is built into the rhythms of how we follow Christ. And so this morning we've got an opportunity to do just that. We have a speaker, Chris Russell, with us this morning, and Chris is the director of engagement for an organization called Destiny Rescue. And they're an international nonprofit, faith-based organization that focuses primarily on rescuing underage girls from sex trafficking and helping them stay free. Chris has been a pastor for 23 years before he took this role in 2019 with Destiny Rescue. And his passion, what he likes to do is to help people learn about this issue and to empower them to use their voices and their influence to give their best yes to raise awareness and resources to launch this new rescue stories. So please join me in welcoming Chris Russell.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to be here with you this morning. I live over in Goshen, Indiana, so just a little 4.5-hour puddle jump over here to the metropolis of Leesburg. So when Scott and I we were talking about meeting up last year, and we didn't realize we lived that far from each other, because I guess you guys have, Scott, where are you at? What did we talk about? We were going to meet up somewhere, and then that's when we realized, because it was Leesburg and Goshen, and Goshen's like an hour from here, is that right? So we were going to meet up for coffee, and he's like, hey, we meet for coffee in this place. I'm like, I've never heard of that place in my life. Like, what are we talking about? So I look it up and realize, oh, we're in completely different states, talking about the same towns, but different states. So, but it's good to be here with you this morning. Again, my name's Chris Russell. I've been a pastor for 27 years, if you include the time with Destiny Rescue now. And I live in Goshen, Indiana, about a half hour from South Bend. My wife and I are there, and I have 4 kiddos. Actually, my son is 23, and he lives in Cincinnati. He's in this area. And then my 3 girls are 19, 15, and 9. And I don't know about you, but so we adopted our girls 6 years ago. In July, it'll be 6 years. They're 19, 15, and 9 now. And the reason I say that is because it was quite the wake-up call, because I was one of 3 boys growing up. And all of a sudden, I got 3 girls in the house, and I realized boys and girls are very, very different in those years. Anybody testify to that? Anybody grew up with boys? Like, there's a lot more drama with girls than there are with boys, and it's why I volunteer to go on the road a lot to get. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. No, here's the reality. My 4 kids, I would do anything to keep them safe. I would do anything to make sure that they have a safe place to live, that they know that they are loved, that they are protected, and they get to hear about the love of Jesus Christ. And my guess is there's a lot of you in here that have daughters or granddaughters or nieces or special young ladies in your life as well, and you would do the exact same thing, wouldn't you? You would do anything to keep them safe. But the reality is, with the issue we're talking about today, is that there are so many kids on our planet that don't have anyone standing in that gap for them. And that's what we get to do together, is stand in that gap and fight for them. So I don't know about you, but was anybody else during COVID, when the worst parts, when we were in major lockdown, was anybody else guilty of binge watching more TV during that? Okay, next series, Pastor, is on telling the truth, because I saw two hands like during that whole thing there. So we got hooked on, anybody watch Chicago Fire? Anybody watch that show? So we got hooked on that show, and it's about the men and women of Firehouse Station 51 in Chicago, and they're broken, messed up, imperfect people just like you and me. But every day they go out on rescue missions. They go out on missions to make sure that people are safe and freed from horrible situations. And obviously that resonates a lot with what I do. But here's the reality, is this idea of rescue missions isn't anything new. In fact, it goes all the way back to the first book of the Bible in Genesis. We read about how God created man and women in his image, but then they did what you and I do. They decided they know better than God, right? Really, the easiest definition of sin that I know is choosing our way over God's way. And they decided they knew better than God. So they chose their way, and sin entered the world, and the consequences of that were devastating. Their relationship with God was broken, their relationship with each other was broken, their relationship with creation was broken, and they were doomed to spend eternity separated from God. And God, out of his crazy love for them and his crazy love for you and I today, wasn't okay with that idea of being separated from his kids. And so he started the ultimate rescue mission. And every story we read through that lens, through Scripture, we read story after story of how God steps in and sets his people free. And he is the ultimate rescuer. And if you are here today and if you have made a decision for Jesus Christ, you have a rescue story to tell. And your rescue story is different than my rescue story, but all of us have been set free from something, and we've all been set free for something. And every single one of those rescue stories is worth celebrating. Amen? So my dad passed away December 31st of 2019. And the last 5 years of his life, he had a battle with dementia. And my guess is there's probably some people in here, whether that's currently or it's been part of your history, have had friends and loved ones who have been through that battle as well. And towards the end of his life, my dad didn't recognize us three boys. He knew my mom was important, but he couldn't quite figure out exactly what role she played in his life. But other than that, he just didn't have much of a memory of anything. But right up to the end, you know what my dad never forgot how to do? Give some answers. What do you think? Yeah. And that would be the obvious spiritual answer, right? But it's not. You know what my dad never forgot how to do? Dance. My dad never forgot how to dance. He would be in his retirement center. He would be sitting in a chair, completely out of it, and they'd put some music on, and all of a sudden, you just give it a couple minutes, all of a sudden, it'd be like, and then eventually he'd get up and out of his seat and he'd start moving around, and the ladies would come over. They loved dancing with him, the ladies that worked there, and he'd just start moving around. Unfortunately, those dance moves are hereditary. What you saw right there, that's pretty much all the moves I have. Thanks, Dad, for that. But he never forgot how to dance. And, I think about my dad. There's times in my life where, and maybe you've done this, and I think about the age I'm at, and I think about what was my mom doing at that age? What was my dad doing at the age I am now? And I was thinking about that at that time as I spent those last few days with Dad. And I remember at my age at that point, my dad had this huge burden on him to be able to share his faith more effectively at that time. And that came out of his love for his dad, because my dad was a Christian, but his dad, my grandpa, was not. And my dad wrestled so much and couldn't stand the idea of being in eternity without his dad. So he wanted more than anything for his dad to know Jesus. And so he started taking classes at his church on evangelism and sharing his faith. And then he started taking, every other weekend, he would drive from Pittsburgh to mid-state New York. And he would sit down with my grandpa and he would share the gospel of Jesus Christ with my grandpa. And then it happened. At the age of 91, my grandpa made a decision for Jesus Christ. And I remember a couple months later, he came down for Thanksgiving meal. And everybody's got their traditions at Thanksgiving, right? And my family's no different. My dad does a prayer of blessing over our family. Well, my grandpa asked if he could do the prayer that year. And to this day, I can't tell you a word that man prayed, but it was the most beautiful prayer I'd ever heard in my life. That's what happens when God rescues and sets people free. All of us have rescue stories to tell. But here's something I want to make sure you understand in our time together today. Jesus is the ultimate rescuer. But what he does for you and what he does for me, he invites us to join him in doing for others. God takes broken, imperfect, messed up people like you and me and my dad, and he allows us to play a part in bringing rescue to others. And while our spiritual rescue is the ultimate rescue, there are many other types of rescue that our Father invites us to join him in carrying out. And throughout the Bible, we read account after account of God calling his people to step into situations to help rescue people from all kinds of injustices. We see Noah, who's called to rescue the few remaining faithful before the flood came. We read about Moses, who was used to set thousands and thousands of Hebrew slaves free from the Egyptians. We learn about a young queen named Esther, who helped to rescue her people from certain destruction. We read about miracles performed by the apostles to bring healing and wholeness, and the list goes on and on. People being rescued from pain and suffering, rescued from hardened hearts, rescued from abuse and neglect, rescued from guilt and shame, rescued from injustices. The theme of rescue saturates our scriptures. And of all these rescue stories, they all start with God ultimately. But there's often a time where he stirs inside of us to join him in his rescue efforts. And when he stirs, we have to be obedient and step into tough situations. We have to be faithful in seeking out the lost, and we have to be relentless in setting the captives free. And I don't know of a person on this planet who is more relentless in helping to set the captives free than Tony Kerwin, my teammate and the founder of Destiny Rescue. You know, back in the late 90s, Tony and his wife went to Southeast Asia on vacation. And while they were there, a conversation that turned out to be another trafficker talking to another tourist, offering a young child for a couple $100 to do whatever they wanted. And that became his reality. And their prayer became, God, have mercy on these kids. Who wouldn't pray that, right? But then they went home, and if you've been walking with God for a while, you know how this works. Something started to stir, and he couldn't let it go. And over time, that prayer changed from God have mercy on these kids to God have mercy on us if we don't do something to help these kids. He was an electrician by trade, sold their stuff. They moved in 2001, and he, to this day, is part of regularly going out on rescue operations to set kids free. One of my favorite sayings of Tony's, it's very simple, but it really sums it up when you think about that, is this here. We only have two choices. You can what? Do nothing or do something. Say that with me. We only have two choices. Do nothing or do something. Now, most of you are familiar with the parable of the Good Samaritan. And I'm not talking about who's who, what role they played in society or any of that kind of stuff, but what's the gist of it? There's a man who's going down the road, a group of robbers jumps him, beats him half to death, leaves him on the side of the road to die, right? 3 people come along. The first person comes along, they see the injustice, and they keep right on moving down the road. The second person comes along, sees the same injustice. Some translations indicate that he went over and actually took a closer look at it. But when all was said and done, he went back to life as usual. And then the third person came along, saw the same injustice that the other 2 saw, but he couldn't walk away. Something stirred inside of him, and he had to step into that situation and make a difference. Because all 3 of those people had 2 choices. They could what? Do nothing or do something. And my hope is, and my prayer is, that at the time that we have together today, my first prayer is that God wrecks you in the most beautiful way possible. Because when we are broken by the things that matter and are close and dear to the heart of God, it allows us to connect with him at a whole new level and understanding. This matters to the heart of God. It's got to matter to the hearts of his kids. And we get to talk about that together today. One of my favorite verses, this is a verse, think about that in the context of what we're talking about here. Psalm 82, verses 3 and 4. Give justice to the poor and the orphan. Uphold the rights of the oppressed and the destitute. Listen to this. Rescue the poor and the helpless. Deliver them from the grasp of evil people. Does that get any more literal than what we're talking about today? Together, we get to literally be a part of rescuing kids from the grasp of evil people. So let's take a minute and let's just kind of take a 30,000-foot view of this issue so that we understand just how big of a problem we're talking about here. Human trafficking is the fastest growing criminal activity in the world right now. It actually makes more money than illegal drugs and firearms now. And why is that? Because if I sell a gun, I make a profit once. If I own a girl, I might be selling her thousands of times. The NFL is my favorite sport. By far our most profitable sport. They make money hand over fist, don't they? The NFL makes a profit of about $8 billion a year. Baseball, basketball, football, hockey combined makes a profit of about $30 billion a year. Human trafficking makes over $150 billion a year. And we estimate about $99 billion of that is specific to sex trafficking. And as you can imagine, about 98 to 90% of victims of sex trafficking are female. And we know that right now there are over 1 million kids around our world who are being sex trafficked. That's not okay. And it's not something we get to stick our heads in the sand on. We get to be a part of joining God and setting kids free. You guys remember in the book of Numbers when Moses sends the 12 spies out to check out the land? 10 of them came back, and what did they say? Giants, right? It's too big. Not a chance. Not a chance. But the other 2 came back who saw the exact same thing, and what did they say? Let's go. God's got this, right? Looking at the exact same situation. And that's what this issue can feel like. Man, $150 billion? 1 million kids? It's giants. It's too big. Let's just go back to putting our heads in the sand. But how did 2 other people look at the same situation and go, let's go. God's got this. So you have a choice to make. When something in your life feels overwhelming, when it feels too big, when it feels like a giant, you can either look at the bigness of your problem or you can look at the bigness of your God. And we serve a big, big God, and he is kicking down walls, and he's using people like you and me to do it. And here's the celebration part of this. Last year, because of people like you, because of churches like yours, we were able to rescue 3,144 individuals out of trafficking situations. The youngest that we have rescued were 2 8-month-olds. One of those was a kidnapping situation that we were asked to be a part of. And one of those was more common, and a girl that belonged to a brothel, she had a baby, and that baby becomes property of the brothel. And it's just a matter of time before something happens to her. Got both of those 8 months old before any kind of abuse happened to them. But that just shows you how deep and dark this situation is. So how does all of this happen? You know, our frontline teams are constantly on the lookout for kids who are being preyed upon and exploited. Girls like Lee, who at the age of 15, she was kicked out of her small village, told by her mom that she was dead weight, that she needed to go and get a job to support the family. So she made the 6-hour ride to the big city where she thought she got a job at a restaurant, but she was quickly tricked into going to a bar where she was given a room, and one man after another started showing up and abusing her over and over again all night long. And that was her introduction to her new life for the next year and a half. She was forced to drink a lot of alcohol and take drugs, and if she refused any man, she was beaten severely. Girls like Bodum, who grew up in a loving home, but her dad died and the family was left with this huge debt, so she went to the city to get a job. She was a naive girl, and she was coerced into working at a brothel where men used her over and over again, and she felt dirty and full of shame. Girls like Noy, who remembers spending her days in the room at the brothel crying until it was time to go to work again. She was always afraid of the violent men, and she felt worthless as everyone just saw her as a prostitute and nothing more. Our team is relentless about finding these children and setting them free to live out their God-preferred futures. So how do we do that? There are basically 4 categories of rescue, and I'll just talk about each of those quickly. So border rescues. Some of the countries that we work in, we're doing operations in 13 different countries right now, and some of the countries we work in have open borders between them. So traffickers are going into these poorest of villages in other countries like Nepal, and they're promising girls great paying jobs, or they're playing this ruse on social media that they've fallen in love with the girl, and they want her to come to their country, marry her, and give her the life of her dreams. And these girls are desperate enough, they want out so badly, they bite on this. So what happens there is at the border stations, the traffickers aren't going with the girls across the border. Why? Because we have border stations and they know we're there. So they tell them that they're going to meet up on the other side. So these girls are coming through these border stations. We're our agents. And for our border stations, it's almost all native female agents that are there at the border stations. They have permission to stop anyone who looks like a minor. And they pull them out and they ask them questions. Where are you going? What are you doing? Where you promise this? Where you promise that? If any red flags go up, they call back to the family. 90% of the time, the family has no idea they're getting ready to step across the border into this other country. And if they make that step across that border, they will never be seen again by their family, stepping into one of the worst places on the planet for trafficking of children. So the good part is we're rescuing the kids in these situations before any abuse happens. We're interrupting the traffic flow, and those are the best kinds of rescues, right? Those are the best kind for sure. Covert rescues. Covert rescues. So here's a couple things to know about us. We are the only large-scale anti-trafficking group in the world that is focused on children, and we are one of the very few that actually has our own undercover agents. We have typically between 35 and 40 full-time undercover agents. There's a lot of trafficking groups doing great things with the best of intentions, gathering intel, but then they're handing it off to local police to follow up on it, and local police are getting paid to look the other way. So we train up and build up our own undercover agents stuff. So I'm on our U.S. team here on our team of about 25 that we have in the U.S. So I'm not one of our undercover agents full time, but when I travel to our different countries that we work in, I get to go out undercover with our guys. So when we're doing covert rescues, we're going into bars and red light districts where we know girls are being used and abused, and we're walking into places and we're sitting down. I want you to imagine like one block with about 10 bars on each side. And each bar, let's take this middle section here, just a little wider, and the whole length of this room here. So you've got a bar going along the whole length of one side, high top tables, a pool table, and some couches in the back. Pretty common view for those. We're going into those, we're sitting down at the tables. The girls gather around your table. They don't have hello, my name is tags on, nobody cares what their name is. In fact, many of the girls, you go into places and they literally have numbers pinned onto their outfits. That's how they get ordered for the night. And we gather the youngest looking girls to sit with us, and then we go into intel gathering mode. So we're gathering information, trying to get contact information, verify their age, all those kinds of things that help us determine if this is someone that is underage and that we get out of here. And the hope is after a couple nights, we build enough trust level that we pay the bar owner what's called the bar fine, because they're losing an employee for the night who would be selling drinks and making them money, so you got to compensate them for that. And then you negotiate a price with the girl, which we know where that's going to end up going, right? And then we take them wherever we want and do whatever all night long, and then they're back at work the next day, and the horror starts all over again for them. So we pay that bar fine, but instead of taking them to horror, we're taking them to their freedom. And we're able to take them somewhere safe where one of our caseworkers or native speaking agents is able to say, hey, this is who we really are. This is how we can help you get out of this situation, and then they can choose to come into our care at that point. So that's about a quarter of our rescues. Quarter for border, quarter for covert. Historically, raids have been about 50% of our rescues. So when we're doing raids, you have to have what's called an MOU. It's a Memorandum of Understanding. It's a legal document between us and each country that we're in that establishes what we can and what we can't do in that country. But what it allows us to do with the MOU is it allows our guys to go in with the hidden body cameras on them. So now we're going in not just looking for underage girls, but we're actually gathering legal evidence against the traffickers as well. So that when we get enough evidence, we get the green light from the local authorities, we do a joint raid with them, and we're able to not only rescue the girls, but then we can turn around and prosecute and shut down the business and prosecute the traffickers in a court of law in that country as well. So like in places like the Philippines, where we do probably the most amount of raids, in the Philippines, if you're caught trafficking 2 minors, that's a 30-year sentence. and you get 30 years for each additional child that you traffic. So a few years ago, we were part of arresting a couple that had 10 minors. Each of them got a 270-year sentence, which in my book isn't enough, but at least the country's serious about fighting this crime and wanting to get kids out of there. So that's that. So what's interesting, and I'm going to share a couple stories with you here shortly, is the interventional, which we're actually starting to call more survival at this point. So in June and July, I got to spend 3 weeks in Africa. We have 3 countries that we're working in Africa. Uganda has been public for a while. On Valentine's Day, we just went public with Kenya. We've been there for a year, but everything starts in pilot status so that we make sure we're building something sustainable before it goes public. So I got to be in Kenya in June and July, and then got to celebrate with that on Valentine's Day when they went public with that on our social media as well. And then we have another pilot country that we're working in as well. But I got to go and spend 3 weeks there and got to visit with about 150 of our rescued girls, which was amazing. And what I loved was the countries we were in used to be British colonies, so all the girls know English. So I didn't have to wait on a translator to talk to girls. I could just sit with each girl and hear their story straight from them, and that was really powerful. So, but in survival rescues, what we're finding in places like Africa is we're not even dealing so much with traffickers on a regular basis. There is such a desperation level among these young girls for survival that they're selling themselves to be able to survive each day. The good news with that, not that there is good news with that, but understand the good news about that dynamic is we're able to get in and rescue kids quickly because we don't have to do all this undercover work. Does that make sense? We don't have to do all this undercover work looking at the traffickers and figuring out all that stuff. Like we can just go in, find out kids that are in this situation and go in and get them in our program as quickly as possible. So we believe that Africa is going to absolutely explode for us in rescues here. But I want you to understand something. Those stories I shared about earlier, and when I talk about our agents going in and rescuing people, I want you to understand something very clearly. This is really important. Their rescue story did not start the moment that our rescue agents got them out of that situation. That is not the beginning of their rescue story. Their rescue story started on a day just like today, in churches just like yours, with people just like you, who decided they were going to do something. They weren't going to put their heads in the sand anymore. They were going to do something. They were going to start using their voices and influence, which we're going to talk about, to raise awareness and figure out how to set kids free. They can't do what they do best if we don't do what we can do best. Does that make sense? We empower them. If we don't provide the voice, if we don't provide the resources, they can't do anything that they're doing. And I've seen times where that's happened, where there hasn't been enough resources and they haven't been able to go back to where they knew there was some kids being used and abused. And by the time they got the resources to fly back over there again, they were gone. And there's a good chance they're never going to catch up with them again. And that's heartbreaking for our agents to do that work, to see those kids, to hold their hands, to have their arms around them, and then they're gone. It's heartbreaking for them. So we have to all do our part. But how cool is that we can make the decision together that we're going to start some new rescue stories today? That there's some kids out there that have no idea that help and hope are on the way, and it's all going to start because of what your church family is going to get stirred up to do. For me, that's awesome. Brand new rescue stories are going to start because of our time together today. It's not just about setting kids free. We want to make sure that they stay free for the long haul. We want to introduce them to the ultimate rescuer. So we have what's called the Path to Freedom. You don't need to read all that stuff up there. Basically, the people who know each girl best are going to come up with a plan that's going to set her up for success for the long term. So that might be relational, social, physical. You can imagine the medical needs, the spiritual needs, whether they need educational and vocational training, whatever that is. The people who know each girl best are going to come up with a plan to set her up for the long term for success. And because it doesn't do us any good, again, to set them free if we can't make sure they can stay free for the long haul. So you guys up for a couple stories from my Africa trip? Is that okay? So this next picture here, this is actually one of the villages we went to. So we went over there for 3 weeks. It was me, our CEO, and then our international marketing guy, and then our main marketing video person, actually lives in England area. So we all went for 3 weeks, and we were capturing a lot of stories as we were there. So one of the stories we wanted to capture was of a 16-year-old girl who had entered into our program just a few months earlier, and she was living in this village right here in one of those huts. And you can imagine you go into these little huts. They're concrete huts, thatch roof, concrete floor. We walk into her hut where she shares it with another 16-year-old girl, and they've got one of those cheap plasticky roll-out mats that is just on the concrete. That's what they sleep on. She had a toothbrush and 2 changes of clothes. That's everything she owned in the world. At 14 and a half, her mother got remarried, and her new dad decided he didn't want any kids at home and said she's old enough to take care of herself. So she was kicked out at 14 and a half, moved into one of these huts with another girl her age, and this was her reality for a year and a half. For a year and a half, every single day, she had to walk with other young girls down to a well-known street corner, and they had to hope that one of the local guys driving by would choose them to take and abuse so they could get $1.50 or $2 to be able to eat that day. And the next day she got up and she did it again. And the next day she got up and she did it again. See, we live in a country where we're constantly thinking ahead, aren't we? We're anticipating stuff, we're looking forward to stuff, holidays, family get-togethers, something with our work, whatever that looks like. We're constantly looking ahead to stuff. But when you're in these situations, you're not looking ahead to anything. All you do is wake up and go, how do I survive one more day? And then you wake up the next day and you ask the same question. How do I survive one more day? But what's awesome is we went in to hear her story, and obviously that part was extremely heavy. Just by starting her in our food program, just by making sure, something we take for granted, just by making sure she had enough food to eat every day, she never had to make that walk again. Just by providing enough food. But then, of course, we go the additional thing. We have what's called TOJ, the training on the job, where we connect these girls with local business leaders who agree. We have a partnership with them to train these girls on different things. So she was in our hair salon program along with her roommate. So we go from this heaviness of her real story to this immediate transformation of her never having to get abused again just by having enough food, to now she's in this hair salon program, and she's already, after just a couple months, already earned a chair in that salon to get a permanent job. And she is so excited about her future now. A girl that just a couple months before only knew abuse and darkness is now so excited about her future. In fact, the last thing she said when we wrapped up the interview, she said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you. I have run out of words." In 2 months. In 2 months, we saw the most drastic transformation you can possibly imagine in the life of a child. And it happens because of people like you that decide that we're going to send the light of Christ. We're going to send help and hope into the world for kids who don't have it. One of the places we went to in Kenya, now I can talk about it from stage. Usually I have to kind of refer to it, but now that, because I don't know if are we streaming or anything that gets used on social media and that. So Kenya is one of the countries that we are in. And what's really unique there is we are partnering with a church in Kenya, and they have put this network of like 6 churches together. And what they've done is a lot of the families have gotten licensed as foster families, which isn't nearly as extensive as a process as it here is in the U.S. But what they've done is they've got licensed as foster families. So now girls who are getting rescued immediately get to be able to be placed with a healthy Christian family right away. How awesome is that? And we had an opportunity to sit down with some of these girls and capture their stories, but we also got to get into a room with about 20 of these foster parents. And they stood up one by one and they introduced themselves and they shared about the kids that they were fostering. And then we asked them to share their whys. Because the reality is we got to go visit 4 of these families. And these are families that barely are making enough to provide for their own family. And here they're opening up their doors for another child to come in, another mouth to feed and take care of. And we thought, what's the why? And we had 3 people that got up and basically said the exact same thing. This is what they said. If you can, why wouldn't you? If you can rescue kids, why wouldn't you? Man, that was a gut punch. And I bring it back here to the U.S. because I think that's the challenge for us. If you can, why wouldn't you? If your church can set kids free, why wouldn't you? If your family can set kids free, why wouldn't you? If your school can set kids free, we have an amazing program. Anybody who's a student, anywhere from elementary school up to college, grab one of the Rescue Op pages at my table there. It is about teens rescuing teens in many ways. That's the whole subtitle, is Rescue Op 120, Rescuing Kids Like Me. And we've got teenagers and younger all over the country right now that are using their voices and their talents to set their peers free. And if you are in that age group, I want you to hear me clearly on this. God is raising up your generation to set kids free. My generation is setting tens of thousands of kids free. Your generation is going to set hundreds of thousands of kids free. And I think God's going to use some of you in that fight. So if that's something stirring in you, make sure that you grab that Rescue Op 120 and come see me afterwards. Because sorry, I get a little fired up about our students because they're amazing and they're doing incredible things to set their peers free. So how can you join us in starting some of these? So let me talk about the financial side of stuff real quick because it's important. It's not, I don't consider myself a fundraiser. We raise funds, but if that's ever like the focal point of what I do, I'm out because that's not life-giving to me at all. But we know that funds raised rescues kids. So we have the Rescue a Child program, which is, on average, it's about $1,500 for us to rescue a kid. That's the average cost to fly in our agents, do their undercover work, get the girls out to a safe place to start that freedom plan that we looked at. $1,500. So we know there's a tangibleness of that, of knowing $1,500 will set a child free. And guys, we live in the richest country in the history of the world. What are any of us going to do with that amount of money in our lifetimes that's more significant than rescuing a child out of this kind of hellish reality? All of us have the opportunity to do that. Some are in the place where they can do that now. You could start a rescue story today. Maybe God's blessed you with that and you're getting stirred up to do something. Man, start a rescue story. Go for it. But a lot of people aren't in the place where they can just do that. So our other main program is called Rescue Partners. And what I love about our Rescue Partners is because we firmly believe that everybody can do something, this isn't a set amount. You know, a lot of places like child sponsorships like $35 a month or whatever that is. This is not a set amount at all. I literally have students who do $1, $5 a month, and I have people who do $1,500 a month as Rescue Partners. The idea is all of us can do what? Something. And God takes all of those somethings and sets a lot of kids free. So I've got Rescue Partner packets at the table there, and if that's something that God's stirring inside of you, then you can go ahead and fill that out, go online, whatever that is. But now let me talk about what I love. What I love is helping people get their best yes. God has never wasted a day of your life. Everything that you've been through, God can use to be a part of rescuing kids. Your business can set kids free. Your school can set kids free. Your youth group can set kids free. Your club can set kids free. Your life group can set kids free. What do you love to do as a hobby? What's a hobby you love to do? How can you leverage that and set kids free? All of us can do something to set kids free. Right before COVID, I had 2 7-year-olds in Fort Wayne. One of them did a lemonade stand for the summer. Her best friend did little homemade candies. Those 2 7-year-olds raised $2,200 and rescued a child. I got to go down to my brother teaches at a private Christian school in the Georgia area, and my parents were at a retirement center at the time, about an hour away from there. So in the morning, I got to speak to 500 high school kids, and they were getting all fired up and ready to go. And then in the evening, I'm over at the retirement center, and the youngest person I'm talking to there is probably about 75 or so. And by the time we get done talking there, the little old ladies are in the corner in the knitting group figuring out this is what we're going to do this year. We're going to make these, and we're going to sell them here, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to set a kid free. 7-year-old, 87-year-old. All of us can be a part of setting kids free. I have people who do bowling tournaments, best ball golf tournaments. I got a lady in Chicago that runs marathons. And she decided, you know what, I'm just going to invite people, tell them why I'm running this. I'm going to run for a cause and invite people to join me in and sponsor me on this. She's raised over $100,000 running marathons, something she was going to do anyways. She just decided, you know what, I'm going to add a kingdom purpose to this. Got a lady from the church that I was at, the first time we brought Destiny Rescue in 2015, and she was rubbing her belly, 7 months pregnant, rubbing her belly, thinking about this is the reality of the world that my baby girl's coming into. And while she heard about Destiny Rescue for the first time, her baby girl kicked her. And she went home that night and sat down with her family, and she said, God kicked all of us And we thought, what are we going to do? We've got to do something to rescue a child. And they thought, you know what? Everybody's got junk. Let's sell people's junk and rescue a kid. So they started getting the word out. And pretty soon they had enough donations come in. They didn't have enough room in their garage. That wasn't going to work. Well, her dad worked at a plumbing and heating place in town, and they said, you can use the back half of the warehouse. So the first day came for their first year that they did the sale. Started at 8 o'clock with the goal of rescuing one kid. By 9 o'clock, they had rescued one. By the end of the day, they had rescued 4. The next year, they had rescued 5. The next year, because the community knew it was coming together, they had so much stuff come in, and people started donating bigger ticket items and auctioning off services, working on cars, painting, videography, photography stuff. Went to 2 days because there was so much stuff, rescued 15 kids the third year. Fourth year, some medical issues got put together late, still rescued 8 more kids. 2 years ago, rescued 16 a few months ago, and their 6th annual one, rescued 20. So what started off in the heart of one person that had a desire to rescue one child ignited the faith of hundreds of people to pull this thing off now, and has raised enough money to rescue 68 kids. That's what fires me up. When people decide, I'm going to do something and I'm going to bring as many people into it as I possibly can. That's what fires me up. And I think God's stirring in the hearts of some of you, and you've got a talent or a hobby or something that you're an expert in. Maybe it's with your work or your business. Man, lean into that. Just pray this week, God, what do I have in my life that I can use for your kingdom purpose to set a kid free? You have tremendous influence. You have a powerful voice. Use it for a kingdom purpose. Make sure you follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We have accounts on all 3 of those, so make sure that you're following along. Share those, and then add your voice to it so people in your circle of influence understand, why does this matter to you? And it raises more awareness and invites more people into the fight. Do something. Use your voice. Use your influence. Raise awareness. Raise resources. Set kids free. Let me close with this story. One of our girls that we rescued a number of years ago, Mew, her story was very similar to other stories that I shared already. They were at a Christmas party, and you can imagine a room full of 12 to 17-year-old girls, how loud and rambunctious that can be, right? But then eventually the atmosphere changed, and girls started getting up and they started sharing their stories, and they started sharing what they had been rescued out of. And eventually Mew, who was a pretty quiet girl, she finally got up and she started to share her story. And when she got done, she said something that motivates me every day to do what I do. She simply looked at our caseworkers and our rescue agents and she said this: "Thank you for considering my life worthy enough to come and rescue." I heard a statistic once that the average cost to have sex with a child worldwide was $4.35. That's the value the world has placed on these precious kids. And as Christ followers, could we be any further from the truth? These are image bearers of the King of Kings, and they deserve anything that we can do to fight for them, to set them free, to introduce them to the ultimate rescuer, and live out their God-preferred futures. Thank you for allowing me to be here, Pastor. Thank you for allowing God to stir up in your hearts. I'm looking forward to seeing what God's going to do in you and through you to set more kids free. Pastor.
Right now is to rescue a child. We're gonna pass some plates. Scott's got some stuff put together for that, and we're gonna pass plates, and we're gonna give you an opportunity just above and beyond, what you give on a weekly basis in tithe. And I think for us, we live in a culture where it's just easy to bury our heads, isn't it? and just pretend like these things aren't happening. To not think about it, worry about it. But this has been a gut punch. And And this has been eye-opening. And we have been given an opportunity by God here. And we do have the resources to give even a small bit to save a life, to rescue a child from a horrible, horrible thing. And so, Chris, thank you for giving us this opportunity today. Thank you for allowing us to see, the truth of something that we would rather not see because it's horrible, it's disgusting, it's terrible. And so we're going to take that opportunity and hopefully bless this ministry. Scott has put up a thing here. If you don't have cash, if you don't have your checkbook with you and you want to use this as a QR code to where you can give directly to the ministry, and that's a way to do it as well. But thank you again. What a blessing. What a great morning for us to be here, and this really just kind of goes along with what we're talking about. We went through this first series where we talked about our personal relationship with God and just connecting to Him more deeply and how everything flows out of that. Our connection to God. Why are our hearts breaking? Because we are connected to God. Because we have His heart in these things. And when we see these things, it's not just, oh, that's another thing. No, it breaks our heart for what's breaking His heart and breaking the hearts of thousands of people and millions of people that are getting involved in any way that they can. That's why. And so it starts there, and we started there. Second part was focusing on this, focusing on encouraging and loving and discipling one another in our growth to Christ and making that a priority in our lives. But this last series that we're doing is all focused on what can we do to be the hands and feet of church. And here's a way. Here's an avenue. It's not the only way, and it can't be the only thing you do, because God has given us resources in finance, but He's absolutely given us resources in energy and time that we need to use for His glory as well. But here's one way that we can actively be involved. Here's one way that we can go and be His hands and feet. Let's close in prayer, and then during the last song, we'll pass the plates and give you an opportunity to bless Destiny Rescue's ministry. Bow your heads with me. God, we thank you for this morning. Lord, for the conviction that we feel. Because, as Chris said, these young ladies and men, their lives as image bearers of you, God, are being used in such a horrible and terrible way. And so, God, we ask for your hand just on any ministry involved in saving the life of a child that is wrapped up, that has been caught up in this. We ask for just a heart for that, for you to open opportunities and doors for us to be a part of the solution. And God, pray throughout this series and even this morning, Lord, that you will give us opportunities, that you will open doors, and you'll give us a heart that breaks for service, for giving of time, of resources, of our energy, in every way possible to the glory of you, through the sacrifice of your Son, Jesus Christ. And it's His name we pray. Amen.
Would you stand with us? I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene, and wonder how He could love me, a sinner condemned unclean. I shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. Amen. Have a wonderful week.